Hello and welcome to the Book Club Review. I'm Kate and this is the podcast about book clubs and the books that get people talking. As you may or may not know, the podcast has a Patreon account, which has now been running for a year. Subscribers get a weekly books email from me, and at the higher tier you can join the monthly book club. Everyone also gets occasional special episodes. To celebrate our first anniversary, I thought I'd share with all our listeners the first episode I made just for Patreons, a back-to-school stationery special. September is the time I feel inspired about reading more deeply, taking notes, writing in that book journal of mine, and looking forward to the Booker Prize shortlist, announced on the 16th. With a memory like mine, I know I'm going to need to make some notes, and that's where the stationery comes in. I can spend hours deliberating between blank notebooks and trying out potential pens. And when I met David Frostick, who runs a stationery and homeware store in Southwold, a seaside town on the east coast of England, I knew I had found a kindred spirit. He's given the perfect notebook a lot of thought, and last summer I joined him in the shop to sort through our favourites. Once you've got the right notebook and pen, what's the best way to actually take notes? Laura and I consider the matter, and you'll also hear from two professional journalists, Emily Rhodes and Phil Chafee, who share the techniques that work for them. We've even got a book recommendation or two. All that coming up here on the Book Club Review. But just before all that, a quick word about our episode sponsors, Serious Readers. Hey listeners, before we get started, let me just tell you about our sponsors for this episode, Serious Readers, who make these lights that Laura and I love.
We are big fans. What makes the lights special? Well, they feature daylight wavelength technology, which replicates the daylight spectrum.
What that means is that your eyes get the light that they need, with the result that words stand out more clearly on the page, your eyes get less tired, and Laura and I found we were able to focus more easily. All of which is good news if you're serious about reading.
An added bonus is you can read in bed without the light annoying your partner, because the beam is so contained.
So if you're interested to try them out, we have a special offer for you. If you visit seriousreaders.com/BCR using the code BCR, you get £100 off any HD light, and you'll also get free delivery.
And what I'd say is give them a try. You have 30 days to decide if it's right for you, and if you're anything like us, you won't want to send them back.
Listeners, I am now the owner of both the lamps Serious Readers sent me to try out, because when it came to returning them, I realised I couldn't live without them. So do give them a try. Your eyes will thank you. Right, on with the show. On the east coast of England, there's a town called Lowestoft, where, if you stand on the beach, you can be the first person in the country to see the sunrise. Not far south of there is a seaside town called Southwold, a thriving holiday resort visited and enjoyed by generations of holidaymakers. You may have read about it without knowing. In Penelope Fitzgerald's novel The Bookshop, she fictionalised Southwold as Hardborough, a town that in the novel most firmly does not want a bookshop. Currently, the town's bookshop is a part of the Waterstones chain, but run very much in the spirit of an independent by manager Steph, who will take you to the door and point out the site of the bookshop that Fitzgerald worked in for a time, just over the road. The town also has a wonderful stationery shop, where I make a beeline every year to stock up on notebooks, pens, and weekly planners. With stationery on my mind, I had the treat of meeting David in the shop before opening time for a chat. I began by asking how he got started.
We opened in 2017. I worked in London for a couple of brands for Muji and for Paperchase, and then decided to have a go at doing it myself. I'd always loved Southwold, so I think I was always in love with the idea of having my own store. And Southwold is just absolutely the perfect fit for me to literally live out my stationery dream.
Lots of people maybe say they like stationery, but I just felt from the very first time I met you, I thought, here is a man who is really passionate about stationery. I mean, what is it about it that you love?
Oh, I've thought about this a lot. I think a lot of it's to do with organisation, just that function of stationery. The opportunities, really, when you open a blank notebook are absolutely amazing. It's just endless what you can create or what you can do. And that coupled with this idea of really strict organisation have just always really appeal to me, I guess, and it helps kind of my chaotic brain lots of times to assess things and put things in order. It's a very niche thing, I guess, but there are so many people who love stationery, and I get so many visitors who are in awe of being able to be surrounded by so much lovely stationery, which is always a joy.
And so I thought it would be great to have a chat. You're a man who I think has given a lot of thought and consideration to what's a really great pen, what's a really great notebook. There are so many things here in the shop, really little thoughtful things that almost you feel like you don't quite realise you needed them until you see that. And then you're like, oh, that's the perfect product. I mean, we'll come on to a couple of those, but maybe we should start with the obvious ones. So let's think about notebooks. Now, you are a reader. Do you take notes as you read? Are you kind of a journaler and a jotter?
I don't. When I'm reading, I like to just be immersed in it, really, and I don't really give it too much thought when I'm going through it. What I do though, is I log all my books. So when I've read them, I keep a log of what I've read, and I grade them, and I write a little one-liner, my little one-line review, so that I know what I've read, and so I can keep track of things.
And would you write on a book, or might you use a post-it note, or do you feel the book should remain pristine?
I'm a big e-reader. I will usually read books on my e-reader, but if I love the book, then I will then buy a physical copy with the intention of gifting it to friends or just keeping it on my bookshelf as a book that I know that I will read one day in the future again. When it comes to physical books, I'm quite precious about them. I'll always try and buy the hardback or find a nice version with the best cover. But no, I would never touch it with a pen. I think it would, yes. No. Goodness, no, never.
See, I'm the opposite. I'm horribly casual about my books. I don't regard them as precious at all. And I've always been like this my whole life. I remember when I was quite young, when I was first discovering how much I love to read. And a friend lent me a book called Dragons of Autumn Twilight by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. It was the first time I'd read a fantasy novel, I think outside of like The Lord of the Rings or something like that. Even the first time I kind of understood about this like dungeon master fantasy world. And I was completely obsessed with it. I loved it so much. And I read it, and then I read it again. I may even have read it 3 times. And eventually she asked for it back. And I gave it to her. And even then I didn't really think anything of it particularly, but the book had basically been almost destroyed by all this love that had gone into it from me. And she was really upset.
That's really funny. I'm not surprised. But I guess for me, I will only then buy the physical book once I know that I love the story or once I love it. So then it becomes something precious. On my e-reader, I guess, I don't give them that much thought because I'm just like, oh, it's just, it's a book and I'm just reading it. It's only then when I go to the next level and I'm like, I'm going to purchase this book and physically own it as well. That's when I guess I get more precious about it.
Now, I'm sure the Germans have a word for this, but there is this wonderful sense of possibility with a beautiful blank notebook. And I have notebooks at home that I have bought that I consider so beautiful, I actually can't quite bear to write in them. What's a good practical notebook that's not too precious, that is handy, that if you are someone who loves to handwrite your notes and your thoughts and observations on the books that you read, what's a good notebook that's a handy go-to that people might try?
I'd always start with size. I think size is important when it comes to notebooks. I would always suggest an A5 as your starting point, really. It's a really nice format. It's small enough to put in a bag with your book. So I'd probably go with A5 to start with. Brands, and there's so many brands you can choose from, but my favourite is probably Leuchtturm, which is a German brand. They do some really, really beautiful notebooks. I have one here, which is in a gorgeous, it's called Rising Sun, the colour, which is a really lovely orange colour. And the paper's really, really nice. And they have numbered pages and index at the front, which is really lovely. So you can index your notes. And they come with 2 little page markers, so you can mark up what you're reading as well. And they're just a really nice book. For me, they're the perfect size, a really good paper. And I always choose dots. I think dots is the way forward. Lines is good, but I think dots is better. You kind of have the structure of a line, but without the restriction. So for me, dots is somewhere between plain and line. So yeah, the perfect notebook, I think, is probably dots A5 hardback.
Yeah, and the other thing I think, I'm not sure how that Leuchtturm holds up, but it's quite nice when they open flat, which is something I think also that is a consideration that the best notebook makers take into account.
Absolutely, flat lay is really important, and these are very good at doing that. So you really want it to be able to lay flat. I'm a lefty as well, which makes writing quite tricky at times. So for it to lay flat is quite important, and the Leuchtturm do that, yes. So I always think you could get a spiral bound, but sometimes spiral bounds are quite tricky, especially as a lefty, because you can get a bit smudgy. But I also do this amazing brand where it's a soft ring notebook. So instead of a wire bound ring on the side, it's soft. It's like a soft plastic. So it's very nice on your hand when you write. Stationery geek extraordinaire coming out there.
I'm looking thoughtful because I haven't come across those. I came in with my girls yesterday, and it's just the start of our little holiday down here, and we often pop in. I was like, well, we're just going to go in and have a look. And then we staggered away. We each got like books. And I found these wonderful, the brand is Oh Dear, is that right?
That's right. Yeah. They're a British brand. They're really nice. They do lots of stationery, lots of greeting cards, and the daily planners are quite new for them, I think, but they're lovely. Like a linen bound A5, perfect notebook. And inside, they're all designed to help you plan your day. So there's a to-do list and a time tracker and a notes page. I really like them because they help you structure your day, but without being too, yes, you must do this, eat this, and drink this much water. You know, they're a more relaxed, structural way to plan your day.
I liked that it's got that almost like structure, as you say, on the left-hand page, to-dos and the timetable and today's objective. And I just think, yes, if I just set an objective every day, I'm sure I would achieve great things. Well, it's just so not me. But then on the other side, there's a much more open, just notes. And even that, I like that it's half ruled. And then at the bottom, there's blank space for doodles. And somehow the way that I feel like they've covered all the possibilities really pleased me. Anyway, I was very pleased to get this. But what I loved even more was how to describe it? It's a thick, bright, colourful, elastic strap that has some loops sewn into it. And what you do is you fit it round your notebook, and that is your pen holder. Now, do you make these?
Indeed, yeah. Me and my mum make those. We call them the pen straps. And yeah, they're exactly how you described, really. An elastic that you can wrap around your notebook, either landscape or portrait, and it's got space for 3 pens, so you've always got a pen at hand. And it also works really good to hold your notes in your notebook as well, depending on whether you have it inside the front cover or around the whole notebook. Yeah, they're brilliant. They're really good. They're very popular.
And I love this. And this is what I mean when I say the shop is full of things you just didn't quite know you needed. And you obviously couldn't find something like that. And so you made them, right? You're like, we need to have this thing. And you've made them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the joy of what we do and what I'm able to do, really. Because me and my mum make so much of our product, the fabric-based products, is the fact that we can try out small ideas and see how they roll, really, which is great.
Let's come on to pens then at this point. I took away a pen yesterday. Kaweco, are they German brand?
They are, yes. Another German brand, Kaweco, beautiful. They've been making pens for centuries. The pen that you use, and it's also my favourite pen, is a Perco. Now, it's a rollerball, but it's lovely. It's kind of a 0.7 nib, so it's quite thick. It's quite inky, but it's just beautifully. I mean, it really is the epitome of a brilliant rollerball pen. And it's got a nice chunky barrel, so it's really nice to hold in your hand. It's brilliant.
Because they do these lovely little small fountain pens that I adore because they're so nifty. The way they're packaged, absolutely. And they're beautiful, bright colours. I absolutely love them. But I've tried them before and I don't get on with them because actually my handwriting is so awful. I can't really write with a fountain pen. I can't really write with a biro either. My handwriting is so bad. I basically need pens that almost slow it down or have a beautiful, very thick, almost like definite line. And then that helps my handwriting. But if there are people out there who love a fountain pen, I actually think the Kaweco fountain pens are great. Yeah,
the beautiful Kaweco Sport. I mean, I'm like you, so I'm not great with fountain pens. Again, being a lefty, I just make a big old mess everywhere. But they're beautiful. I so wish I was able to write with one because they're such lovely pens. And they're really compact, like you said, so they're kind of halved down. So you unscrew it and then screw the lid back onto the back of the barrel, so it makes it longer. But yeah, beautiful.
My standard go-to pen, the beige pen that I use, is the Pilot High Tech Point V5 Extra Fine.
Ah, nice. Yeah, very lovely. It's a very nice pen. The other one is an Energel, which is beautiful. Again, it's another 0.7 nib. They write beautifully for that same reason.
Well, I came across them because when I worked at Thames and Hudson, the art book publisher for many years in-house, that was the house pen. And so that's where I discovered them. And then I was recently enchanted to find out that Molly J. Young, who is my book reviewing heroine from the New York Times, posted that it was her favourite pen. And I was like, yes!
That's amazing. That's a nice link to have.
I treasure it. Something else that I was a bit taken with that you've got that I hadn't come across before is a brand called Suck UK. And they have what they call tab notebooks, which are 4 different notebooks that are all the same size, but styled like folder dividers that you have in like a ring binder. So basically you've got each one is a different tab. And I think what I quite liked about this is the idea of compartmentalizing. Sometimes you don't want, if you're someone like perhaps you and I both are, who like things to be quite organized and put in their compartments and separated, sometimes it can be slightly distressing to me to have one notebook where everything is a bit jumbled up. And I quite like the idea that this is a really nice way of, if you are someone who likes to keep things separate, you might like to keep your reviews in one section, your TBR in another. I could see that could work quite well.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're colour coded as well. So you've got the tabs on the side, but you've also got the option to colour code. So if, like me, you have quite a visual with your note-taking and you like things to be very, very obvious, they're great for that because you'll be able to see the colour immediately. So you can associate different colours. Your to-be-read pile could be green and your reviews could be in blue and things. So yeah, they're lovely.
And then highlights. I am quite happy to highlight in a book, and I will do it without thinking too much about it. As discussed, I'm sure there are lots of people who are completely horrified by the idea of highlighting. But if you are a highlighter, if you do love to highlight, I always am drawn to you've got a really nice highlighters section, a lot of the Japanese. How are we feeling about highlighters?
Yeah, amazing. I mean, I've got some here called Propus. Like you said, it's a Japanese brand. And they are super special because they have quite a thick nib, but they also have like a little window in the nib. Now, what I mean by that is when you draw, you can see what you're about to highlight. The nib has got like a hole in it, so you can actually see through onto the bit of text you're about to highlight, which is quite handy when you are highlighting. And yeah, neon orange all the way. Has to be neon orange. It's a great colour for highlighters. Perfect.
Have you been to Japan? You must have.
I haven't, no. It's on the list and I would love to go to Japan. And I feel like I need to take a shipping container with me just to be able to bring back everything that... I don't know if I'd come back, that's the problem. But I'm very much inspired by Japan. I would love to go.
I mean, that's the thing. You go there, and if you're someone like us, you go there, and you just almost like can breathe a huge sigh of relief that maybe you didn't know you were holding your breath in your whole life until you got to Japan, because it's basically a whole nation of people who really love to keep things organized and have really specific ideas about the best ways to do this. And everywhere you go, you see the little devices, and often really beautiful as well. Like they somehow managed to make the idea of organising your stuff into a way of living in a way that's so pleasing. I mean, maybe not all Japanese people are like this, but certainly it's a very distinctive thing that you notice about life and culture there is the way that everything, because it's small, I think, and they have to be tidy because it would just be probably a disaster if they weren't.
Well, all Japanese design is very functional for that reason, I guess, isn't it? But it's just perfectly functional, I think. And they do get that balance between something being practical and functional with it also being aesthetically really pleasing as well. I think I
came across something on Instagram recently. My Instagram knows me well enough, of course, to bombard me with things like this all the time. But I don't mind. I'm very happy to look at some new product I didn't know about. So what these were Post-it notes, but they were clear plastic. And I actually reposted this on stories, just like, this is the most useless thing in the world, like a chocolate teapot. Like, what good is a clear plastic Post-it note? And about 8 people who were all seemed to be academics messaged me to say, no, these are so great, because what you do is you lay the Post-it note over your text, and then you can write on the text if you're like me and want to write on it, but without actually destroying the original book. So maybe a good solution.
Yeah, they're amazing. I've got those. Actually, these ones I have here, they're translucent. So they're coloured, but they're translucent as well. So you can see inside what you're writing on. Yeah, I think they're amazing ideas. I can't believe it took so long for us to discover them.
Well, that's what I thought was quite exciting about it. I just feel like, yes, there are so many products that we haven't even thought of yet. So there's reasons to be optimistic about the future. Right, is there anything else we should have talked about that we haven't? I feel like we've covered the major bases. Let's finish then perhaps on your reading. So what's something you've read recently that you've loved?
Goodness, I'm a big fan of John Boyne, the Irish writer. His latest book, Echo Chamber, I really liked. It's a great parody of modern life and that idea that we all live through our smartphones. But quite comedic, really. That's why I love his writing, because you really don't know what you're going to get when you open a book. He's very eclectic in his storytelling and the different ways he tells story, but Echo Chamber was particularly great. I thought I loved that book.
I'm trying to think if there are any books that incorporate stationery, like any novels. There's Doris Lessing, The Golden Notebook, which I liked because it was that idea of compartmentalising out your thoughts into different notebooks. Which is quite a basic one, but it's been so long since I read it. And in a way, beyond the initial premise about the notebooks, there wasn't enough about stationery in that book.
Well, one of my favourite books of all time is The Edgy Mole Diaries. So I guess that in its entire form is an idea of stationery, isn't it? And his idea of journaling thing. So I guess that's probably an ode to stationery in itself, really, Adrian Mole.
Well, listeners, if you happen to find yourselves in Southwold by the coast, then make a beeline for the shop. And also, of course, they can find you online, can't they?
Indeed, yeah. So I have a website and you can follow me on Instagram. So I'm also on there. So yeah, have a look.
And tell me about the name. How did you come up with Lift?
I guess it's all about the idea of things that make you feel good, really, and lifting you up and making you feel happy. So it really is as simple as that.
I had such a brilliant chat with David. I had been slightly worried that there wouldn't be enough to talk about, but how wrong I was. I think we probably could have talked for another hour. And in fact, after we stopped recording, we did carry on having a great chat about stationery. It's just nice when you find someone who feels the same way as you do about a good notebook.
And of course, I was a little bit skeptical of this episode. I was like, Kate, really? Is there that much to say about stationery as someone who doesn't really think about themselves as a stationery enthusiast? But then I've reflected on that a little bit more. And I'm like, maybe I am a stationery enthusiast.
Well, so, I mean, it's funny, even after all this time, I couldn't say if someone asked me how you like to take notes. Are you a notebook user?
Well, the reason why I think I've been slightly oblivious to the fact that I love a good notebook is because for quite some time in my career, I've always had notebooks and nice pens served up to me at work. So I haven't had to do any conscious seeking out of pens and paper that give me pleasure. But it is very important to me. Muji notebooks were my go-to in my previous role in London. And now I work at an architecture and design firm where people take materiality and aesthetics very seriously. And we have these beautiful cloth-bound notebooks in our brand colors with gorgeous paper inside. And we have these flip pads too with the grid lightly sketched into them for architectural drawings, but I just use them for all my notes. And the pens on offer are the Pilot High Tech Point V5 Pure Liquid Ink. You know these ones?
Of course, as discussed with David. To me, that is my go-to pen. I think you can't really go wrong with a Pilot High Tech Point V5 Extra Fine or the Pilot series in general.
And just think, I have a stationery cupboard at work and I can just walk in there and they have them organized in 8 different colors and I can just take.
So my company that I work at now, I work for a restaurant company. So I'm a graphic designer, but I'm there working on menus and bits and pieces to do with the restaurant world. And it was a source of enormous disappointment to me that they barely have a stationery cupboard. I had to lobby quite hard to get my own magic tape dispenser, which for designers are just kind of useful to have. You're always taping things up. Yeah, it was very disappointing after the glory days of when I used to work in publishing, and Thames and Hudson had an amazing stationery cupboard. It was fantastic. They even had a man, my friend Sam, whose job was to run the stationery cupboard. That's how extensive it was. So yeah, the dream. And when you take notes, let's think about your reading. Do you take notes on the books that you're reading as you go along?
I do not.
You don't jot anything down?
Nope.
And you don't keep any kind of list?
Nope. This is all very embarrassing. I'm the counterpoint to this episode in that I barely manage to keep a list in my notes app on my phone, which just says the titles of the books I've read. And I mainly do that now because we have an end of year episode where we round up everything we've discussed and I have no memory and get to that episode. And I'm like, what did I read? I didn't read anything. And you're always like, here's my list of 50 books. So this is actually a prompt for me to update my list because I don't think I have added to it in about 2-3 months.
No, it's funny. I also completely struggle. I mean, I'm incapable actually of keeping a list as I go along. And the way I cobble that list together at the end of the year is I scroll back through Instagram. Because that actually is where I keep a log of all the books that I'm reading. But then some of them, if I read something just on my Kindle, for example, there won't necessarily be a picture of it or a review on Instagram because those ones often slip through the net. So yeah, it would be good. I mean, I dream of being the kind of person who could just fill notebooks with beautifully thought through notes in lovely handwriting. But in practice, I'm a very erratic note taker if I do at all. My only real system I have is that if there's something on a page of a book I want to remember, I will fold the top corner. And I fold the bottom corner to let me know where I'm up to. That's really the only system I have. And then when we sit down and we talk about books on the pod, immediately I can flip back through and I just have to look at the page and then I can remember the thing that I wanted to pull out. So I don't really need to underline it or anything like that.
I love marginalia in books every now and then. And I feel like it's a lost art because we're not trained in the same way to handwrite, even us at our age. But, you know, I feel like in the 50s, people were trained, and still in different cultures, trained to write a very specific way. And so there's every now and then you'll encounter in like older secondhand books, like these very dainty, tiny little notes written often in pencil. And they are such a pleasure to come across. But anytime I've ever tried to write in the margins of my books, it's just like ugly, clunky, incomprehensible words. It's ugly and makes the book look worse.
Yeah.
So I try not to write in my books for the most part.
I also just don't really know what's underlined sometimes. Sometimes I do, but if I do want to make a note about something, I'm not quite sure what exactly I want to say.
And you go back and you're like, why did I underline?
Well, but the Kindle does this thing as well, where if you have that switched on, and I think by default usually it is, you have to actually go into the settings and turn it off, but the default is that you can see the passages that people have highlighted. And before I understood what this was...
Oh, I hate that. Hate it.
It's so annoying because as you read through, you're like, should I be finding this really significant? That this doesn't seem particularly interesting to me, but 8,000 people have underlined it.
It's also like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Once one person underlines it, another person's going to underline it. And it just, I tend to read guilty pleasures on my Kindle, books that I wouldn't necessarily buy and keep and think about in the long term. And so sometimes the underlined passages are just the most bland, trite statements. And I'm like, that's what people are taking from this novel. Okay.
I don't know. I want to be a better reader. I want to be a richer reader, I suppose, in that I want to extract more from the books and not just read them and have them pass through me. And okay, I get to have the conversation with you, or, you know, if we talk about them on the pod, and that's the very life enhancing thing for me. But it's true that after that, they tend to fall away. And I do wonder whether if I read them a bit more actively, if I had notes in them that I could go back to. I was just in the bookshop here in the town where I'm staying at the minute, Southwold, chatting to Steph, who I know of old. I interviewed her once. Do you remember a long time ago we did an episode with the book club here? So anyway, it was so nice to catch up with her. And I was meeting her colleague Rose, who I haven't met before. And it was such fun getting to know her a little bit and finding out what books she loves, and was just swapping some notes. Anyway, I mentioned to her this note-taking episode, and she is someone who absolutely loves to write in her books, particularly ones that she returns to again and again and again. And we were talking, David and I, about whether you're someone who likes to keep your books pristine, or whether you're someone who really likes to just sort of use them and love them, and you don't mind about them getting a bit damaged in the process. And she was saying when she scans someone's bookshelves, she can instantly tell the books that are the books that have been the most loved. You know, they're the books that are the ones that are almost falling apart. And if you look at her bookshelves, that's the case. Her favourite books, her copy of Donna Tartt's The Secret History, is practically falling apart, and it's covered in handwritten notes. And the other thing I thought was really interesting was she was saying that after she's read a book, if she continues to think about it, she will go back and in a different colour, so that she knows it's a secondary category of thought, I suppose, she will add notes. So if she's had subsequent reflections and she wants to capture them or capture those ideas, she'll go back to the book and write it in the margins in a different colour. So that books for her become gradually almost more and more repositories of memory and thought. There's the text, but there's also her own experience of the text captured in these notes. And I was incredibly inspired by this. I thought, oh, this is the kind of reader I want to be. But I think as I walked back, I was reflecting on it, and I was thinking, for me, it's just time. I just don't have the time to, you know.
I think you should view the pod as your nocebook.
Yeah. It's a conversational notebook.
It's a conversational notebook, yes.
That's why I like to go back and listen to old episodes so much. I occasionally
remind yourself of your views. I'm
so pleasantly surprised. It's like, oh, I thought that. I did like that book. Yes, now it comes back to me.
So it's our memory as well.
In my old age, I'm an old lady, and they'll just be able to put me in my corner of the old people's home and just put the pod on complete loop, and I'll be so happy sitting there.
Before we move on and hear from a few friends about their stationery loves and note-taking practices, I did just want to say that in my teen years, I did have a very important stationery moment in my life when I traveled to Germany and I discovered Stabilo fine liner pens. You know, all the colors. Mm-hmm. And it came in a plastic hexagon case that you could stand upright. And then you had, you know, like 16 colors tucked into it, and you could pull them out. Do you know the pens I'm talking about?
I don't
the
think
Stabilo
I do.
fine liners? Oh my goodness, Kate.
Yeah.
No? Okay,
I don't think so.
Listeners and Kate, it's the Stabilo .88 fine liner pen. The bottom half is an orange similar to a pencil. Ooh. And then the taps are all colored at the top. You've never come across those? Okay. All right. Well, run, don't walk.
Yeah. So I will do a written component to this episode, and I will find links to all these things so that people can go and check them out. And what would be really lovely, because it's Patreon, is that we could ask people to comment and perhaps build up our own little archive of suggestions as well. While Laura and I both have firm opinions on our favourite pens, you're probably thinking, apart from the podcast, we're both pretty hopeless when it comes to any kind of systematic note-taking. And so I turned to a couple of pod friends to find out their tactics. First up, Phil Chafee, our much-loved regular guest, who used to live here in London but has now moved to New York. I mention that as there are some very authentic New York City sound effects in the background of his voice note. Here's what he had to say.
I take notes all the time in my day job. I'm a journalist, but almost never when I'm reading a book. Even when I come on the pod, I might just write down the names of the author and the characters, which I always forget. So I have that to refer to, and potentially I'll write down a couple top line thoughts. But I never basically take detailed notes of a book. I think the last time I did that, I was in uni. With all that said, I like to think that I am more than a passive reader, and you can be an active reader without taking physical notes. All the time when I'm reading something, or even listening to something, to an audiobook, I will be mulling it over, be thinking about certain scenes to remember, thinking about the commentary I have about that I would love to share with a friend or with Kate and Laura on the pod. And I think that sort of engagement with the book does bring a different experience of the book than just sort of passively living in the world of the book and wondering what happens next. So I think there are ways of taking mental notes and actively engaging with a book, which is basically taking notes in your head, are potentially just as useful as physically taking notes. With that said, if you have a memory like mine, a lot of those mental notes disappear into the ether. On the other hand, when I used to take notes of books in school, a lot of those notes I never looked at again, so who can say?
So for Phil, there's a separation between the note-taking he has to do in his professional life and the way he feels about his reading. What about someone who reviews books professionally? Pod friend Emily Rhodes regularly writes for The Spectator and The Financial Times, as well as running her popular monthly walking book club on London's Hampstead Heath. How does she take notes?
It is a really good question, and I think it's something with which I struggled for many years, in fact, because when you're reading a really good book, you don't necessarily want to interrupt the flow of reading to root around for a pencil and piece of paper. If you're like me, you're quite disorganised, you then lose the piece of paper and so that note's disappeared. I never really want to get my phone out when I'm reading, so I feel that really interrupts the connection with the text. In no time, you get your phone out to do one thing and then you're sucked down a wormhole of all sorts of social media evils, and then you've completely forgotten what you wanted to write down in the first place. So what I do is very simple, and it works for me. I hesitate to say this, and some of you might have to cover your ears, but I fold down the corners of books. I hate admitting to that because I grew up never ever bending the pages of books. I was always told it was so disrespectful. You should always use a bookmark, always keep your book really pristine. I still always use a bookmark, but I also bend the pages of books as markers for me as I go. So stage one of note-taking is when I find something interesting on a page, whether that's a great quote, a lovely turn of phrase, some kind of thematic point, something which I want to highlight, I suppose. I fold down the page and I keep on reading. And I get to the end of the book, and then you have this amazing visual aid as you look at the spine of the book with all these little folded pages with special bits on. And then I sit down and I get out my notebook. And okay, so this is if I am writing a review or if I am preparing to lead a book group. Without looking at the book, I jot down all my thoughts in a kind of quite scrambled way. Bullet points, it's just not really a spider graph, it's more just point. And it will often just be a word or an idea or just stuff that I think of. And I do that first. And then I go back through the book and I stop at each folded over page. I reread that page, I find the bit that was important, and I either slot it into one of the points I've already written down on my piece of paper, or I write a new point inspired by that bullet point. And for me, that works really well. I end up with a page in my notebook which is it's a sort of alarming portrait of the inside of my head. It's kind of completely chaotic, but to me it makes perfect sense. And then I'll sometimes put numbers next to the points, or maybe I'll rewrite it on a little postcard if it's for the book club and I have to be very clear about how exactly I'm going to string a thesis out of those points. So that's how I make notes. But I mean, the short answer is I fold the pages over.
So there you go, listeners. Someone else who uses the folded corner method. I am not alone, although I think I feel a lot less guilty about it than Emily does. And does she have a favourite notebook?
It's a cliche, but I am a total sucker for the moleskin notebooks. I really like the thick, creamy paper. I go for the kind of oversized ones that you normally get in packs of 3. I love it if they have a bright colour, but I will go for any colour cover, really. They have to be blank paper. I hate writing on lines. I really hate it. So blank paper, large moleskin notebooks. And my pen, I got given a really beautiful fountain pen as a wedding present from my husband, which was really lovely. And it broke, which is kind of terrible. But then I recently got it fixed. This very nice pen shop in Oxford posted it off to them. They fixed it and posted it back. It's called Pens Plus. So I write with that. That's my favourite pen. But I also love pencils. There are those very nice Blackwing pencils. Again, I was given a bunch of those in my stocking by my mother-in-law. So yeah, wow, my husband's family really sorted me out in stationery. So yeah, the Blackwing pencils are really nice. But I'm not really fussy. I think pencil, pen is fine. I think it's more, for me, it being a really, is the word analogue or manual? I suppose literally manual, like using my hands to write rather than type. Certainly not just saying it like I'm saying this to you. That process of, first of all, folding down the pages and then using my hand to write something in a book feels to me the best way of thinking about books.
Another tip comes from bibliotherapist Ella Bertude, whose book, The Art of Mindful Reading, is full of suggestions for ways to get more from the books we read. She joined me in a recent episode and had this to say on the subject.
It really helps if you have a reading notebook. Whenever you finish reading a book, you write down in your reading notebook what you thought about it. So you note the title of the book, the author, the date you finished reading it, the place you were when you read it, because that really jogs your memory about how you felt about the book, and then a few thoughts about the book. And that really helps you focus on the book you've just read, but it also helps you think about what you loved about the book and therefore what you might want to read next. And you can also, in the back of your notebook, write down the books you've been recommended by other people. So you've always got a physical list of those books. Some people obviously do it online or on computers. I'm a big fan of doing it with a pen on paper in a notebook because it helps you pinpoint your ideas more concretely, I feel, and it's more of a tangible aid to memory, whereas what you do online or on the computer, your brain doesn't quite believe in the same way.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm looking slightly shamefaced because I bought with much enthusiasm and delight this beautiful moleskin reader's journal when I was out visiting Laura in Vancouver. I came across it in the shop. I was like, oh yes, this is brilliant. I love this so much. It was organised with little tabs according to alphabetical, so then brilliant. You know, you can go back and look for your books that way. And I like that. I like that it kind of came preloaded with this nice structure and everything about it I was so excited about. And I managed to write 3 very conscientious, yes, I read this book here and it's recommended to me by so-and-so and this is what I thought about it and here's how many stars I would give it. And I haven't managed to write any others. And I feel so bad about it because I'm just like, why can't I do this thing? I think I know why, is because it feels like work to me. You know, when I finish a book, I just want to move on to the next one and have a nice time reading that. I don't want to have to go back and do what feels to me like a bit of work, admin, capturing my thoughts about it.
Yeah, I totally relate. I have to force myself to do it myself.
Do you? Should I just work a bit harder to force myself to do it? Just a bit of self-discipline wouldn't kill me, would it?
Because it is lovely to have that record. And if you think about it in 5 years' time, you want to look back and have that record of what you read in 2023.
Yeah.
And it's really nice also to show other people and say, oh, look, these are all the books that I read that year and so on. So it is really useful.
You're re-inspiring me about it. I do believe with all my heart that a notebook full of entries on the books I read would enhance my life. And at the same time, I find I'm utterly incapable of doing it. But I do, as Laura points out time and time again, have the podcast. For the last 6 years, the episodes have documented the books I've read, the discussions, and the recommendations I've received, all of which to me feels even better than an illegible notebook. Speaking of which, I did promise you some book recommendations. In fact, when it came to fiction, I was fairly stumped. But for non-fiction, can I highly recommend Adventures in Stationery, A Journey Through Your Pencil Case. Author James Ward felt so strongly about stationery he co-founded a club in London to share his passion with other like-minded enthusiasts. He also wrote this book, which is a surprisingly fascinating read, full of brilliant stories about things you'd never really thought that much about, like Tipp-Ex and those little pencils they give away in IKEA. He also helpfully pointed me towards a work of fiction. He writes, "Few novels have examined the modern office environment in such intricate detail as The Mezzanine by Nicholson Baker. In one beautiful passage, the unnamed protagonist describes the 3 stages he looks forward to as he presses down on the brontosaurial head of the stapler arm to staple together a thick document. The first stage, as you press down on the stapler and feel the resistance of the spring that keeps the arm held up, followed by the second stage, as the stapler blade noses into the paper and begins to force the 2 points of the staple into and through it. And then the final stage, the felt crunch, like the chewing of an ice cube as the twin tines of the staple emerge from the underside of the paper and are bent by the 2 troughs of the template in the stapler's base, curving inward in a crab's embrace of your memo, and finally disengaging from the machine entirely." The protagonist then describes a disastrous scenario familiar to many, finding with your elbow locked and your breath held that the stapler is empty. How could something this consistent, this incremental, betray you? The stapler might not immediately appear to be a romantic object, but Baker's description of feeling betrayed by the empty stapler illustrates the emotional attachment people feel towards these items. Leaving Ward to the rest of his chapter on staplers, I look up The Mezzanine and find out that it is the story of one man's lunch hour. Our narrator interrogates the inner workings of corporate living as he traipses his way down escalators to the first floor and through the mundaneness of office life. And this reminded me of another book, and that is Then We Came to the End by Joshua Ferris. Written in the plural form, it tells the story of a group of people who spend their days, and too many of their nights, at work. Away from friends and family, they share a stretch of stained carpet with a group of strangers they call colleagues. Amidst the boredom, redundancies, water cooler moments, meetings, flirtations, and pure rage, life is happening, to their great surprise, all around them. Then We Came to the End is about sitting all morning next to someone you cross the road to avoid at lunch. It is a wonderful read, formally inventive and full of sharply observed details about contemporary life. Written and set around the year 2000, a pre-WhatsApp age, I wonder how it would hold up now. I think probably pretty well, and so if you haven't read it, I urge you to give it a try. Listeners, I hope you've enjoyed this little dip into our Patreon world. You can find all the details of how to join at patreon.com/The Book Club Review. You'll be joining a great community of readers, and you'll also be supporting me in making the shows. This month we've been reading Zadie Smith's latest novel, The Fraud, and next up in September is Sarah Bakewell's new book, Humanly Possible. As for the main show, I'm looking forward to catching up with Laura and getting her summer reading report, and we're gearing up for Booker season, where as ever we'll be reading and reviewing the shortlist. Don't forget, if you're interested in the Serious Readers lamps we mentioned, you can head to seriousreaders.com/BCR, and if you use our code BCR at checkout, you'll get £100 off any HD light. If you're not in the UK, you can still take advantage of the offer, but there would be a shipping charge. For now, until next time, thanks for listening and happy book clubbing.